Welcome to the Beat Reporter's Inbox on MLB.com, presented by Edward Jones. I'm Jane Lee, MLB.com's A's reporter, with Mary asking the questions. Mary, what do we have first?
Our first question comes from James. It seems as though Chad Pinder could develop into another Ben Zobrist. Agree or not?
Yeah, I think definitely. I think that's kind of what the A's envisioned for him. And as much as I know everyone wants to find one position for him just so that he's out there playing every day, I do still think he has an opportunity to be out there every day, just at different positions, much like Zobrist did, for the A's and of course for other teams as well. I mean, he's uber versatile, obviously has handled Major League pitching well, has done well with the bat, just an all-around versatile, impressive player so far, and I think the A's would love to be able to move him around and just have a piece like that, because as you're seeing around baseball, those pieces are becoming extra important.
Our second question comes from Eric. Could we expect to see Chris Bassett pitch at any time in the big leagues this season?
Yeah, I've been getting a lot of questions about Chris Bassett. He had Tommy John surgery last year. And the expectation was that we would see him back in the starting rotation sometime in June this year. Obviously, that didn't happen. He had a little bit of a setback, but is back to pitching. He's fully healthy. He's pitching for AAA Nashville right now. And though there have been some opportunities for the A's to bring him up in the bullpen, just because they don't want to stretch him out so much right now as a starter. They're keeping him as a reliever. They want to see him have some success at the AAA level before coming back, just because it's such a long process, and you want him to have the opportunity to kind of gain that feel back, gain that confidence back before bringing him back to the major league. So I would suspect they would wait until Nashville season ends at the beginning of September, and at that point rosters will have expanded here, and they can bring him aboard and kind of ease him into a role here. And then going into spring training next year, I would assume that he would be back on the starting depth chart in a starting role, back doing what the starters are doing, because we did see how well he handled that role before he got hurt.
Our next question comes from Ken. Is there any reason to believe that the best young players to emerge from the current core as bona fide major leaguers will get long-term contracts so the A's can build a contender?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that hinges on the A's stadium plans. There's obviously been a lot of talk, a lot of hype around that this year, just with the expectation that an announcement on a new stadium site is coming before the end of the year. I do believe that an announcement will happen. I think I wouldn't be surprised if it happens before the end of the season. And at that point, the A's will have a better idea of this whole timeline, because that kind of affects their plans on the field. It affects their revenue. The quicker they can get into new doors and bring up that revenue, the better chance of them retaining players. So a lot of that depends on where they choose to build. If it's at the Coliseum site, that can obviously happen a lot quicker, and maybe this whole youth movement kind of speeds up and they can lock in these players sooner. But if they choose a different site and maybe a 5-year plan is in the works, then maybe it's not so realistic to have these same guys that are here now still around in 5 years when that new ballpark potentially opens. So as much as they would love to hang on to these guys, this young core that they're trying to build around, I think they just kind of have to wait and see with what happens with the stadium.
This next question comes from Moises. What's the plan with Frankie Montes? Is he a starter or a reliever?
Yeah, I mean, he obviously spent time with the A's this year as a reliever in the bullpen. He can do both. He can start, he can relieve. He's done both before. But just because of the injuries he experienced last year, the A's wanted to kind of ease him in and keep him in the bullpen while he was here. He's hurt right now with Nashville, so I wouldn't be surprised if he's maybe shut down for the rest of the season, and that might be a blessing in disguise, just to afford him extra rest before potentially building him back up to start, because I think when they acquired Montes from the Dodgers last year, they envisioned him as a starter. And he was, of course, so good in spring training that they wanted to bring him aboard the big league roster any way they could. And to do that, that was as a reliever, just because he wasn't built up as a starter. But I think the long-term plan, ideally, would be to have him as a starting option.
Brian asks, when will we see the next Mark Ellis and one youthful Joey Wendle is up permanently with the big club?
Yeah, I know a lot of people have been asking about Joey Wendle this year. Was really great as a September call-up last year, and it was kind of assumed that he would come back this year in sort of that bench role, that same role. But of course, Chad Pinder emerged on the scene, and he's been so good bouncing around the infield, can also play the outfield, that right now there's just really no room on the roster for Joey Wendle. I mean, the infield's so crowded, and also Franklin Barreto will probably be here soon, if not in September, then of course next year. So he's just kind of on the outskirts right now, and I know the A's haven't forgotten about him. Definitely an important guy to have in their system, just in terms of depth. He's really impressed defensively and offensively, and I know he's been bouncing around the infield to kind of diversify his skill set, much like Pinder. So I mean, he could be an injury or two away from being back in the big leagues, but right now there's just simply no room for him.
Our next question comes from James. When can we expect to see the A's in the postseason?
I would like to say sooner than later, but of course we heard Billy Beane earlier this season say something that we really never have in his tenure at the helm, and that's that they're planning a full-bore rebuild right now. They're going to be patient. They've looked at the models of teams like the Astros, what they had to endure and do to get to where they are today. And I know that it's disappointing, and it's probably hard to stay patient just because it feels like they've maybe been rebuilding for several years, but I think Beane is really under the belief that they can do it the way they want to and need to this time around, just because of the prospect of a new stadium, whereas before, that prospect wasn't really on the horizon. There was a ton of talk about it, but no action, but they do seem very close to announcing a new stadium site, and at that point, the front office can work with that and kind of actually envision, building a strong core and also retaining that core. So whether it's these young players we see now that they're able to hold on to, I'm not sure, but eventually that is the plan. I don't see it happening anytime soon, and so I would say be patient, especially in a strong division right now.
Shane wants to know what A's might get traded this winter.
I wouldn't see a lot of that happening this winter, just because they've already traded most of the players that were expected to be dealt. Guys like Sonny Gray and Yonder Alonso. The only player left that was really expected to get traded was Jed Lowry, and he has an option for next year that the A's, I really wouldn't be surprised if they picked up just to hang on to him. They really like the year he's had. And outside of that, you look at the roster, and it's largely a bunch of young guys, and I don't see them trading any of those players anytime soon because, again, as we've talked about here, they want to build around these guys. This is the core that they want to build around, so I can't imagine that they would depart with any of them.
Our next question comes from Kim, who asks, was trading Sonny Gray a mistake?
I don't think so. I think everyone was, of course, sad to see Sonny go. Just kind of a revolving door in Oakland, and I'm sure fans weren't necessarily surprised just because this kind of thing seems to happen every year. And I think the A's are really pleased with the package they got back. And, they had a chance to trade Sonny before that. The last offseason, there were a lot of rumors going around that he would be dealt. But the A's really wanted to hold their ground and wait it out and wait until they got the type of package that they thought they deserved for such a prized pitcher. And although two of those guys are hurt, they still come with very high ceilings. And, moving forward, Sonny was probably going to be dealt, if not, at the time he was than this offseason, because he will be a free agent at the end of next year, and there was just no way that the A's were going to be able to hang on to him and sign him to a long-term deal. So from a realistic standpoint, it was probably the right way to go. I know it's also hard to, see players constantly leaving here.
Parker asks, who are the A's top prospects in Nashville?
It seems right now, a lot of the guys that we consider top prospects heading into the year are here now. You see Matt Chapman here, Chad Pinder, like we talked about before, and some pitchers like Daniel Gossett. And of course, right now, the big one is Franklin Barreto. Got a little bit of a taste a couple months ago, and had his moments, but also struggled some, which is what to be expected out of when a lot of guys come up. And I know that a lot of guys do go through those growing pains, and at some point they're going to have to let him go through them here. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's back here in September as a call-up, just to kind of let him join in and play with the guys that he's played with so long, and get some more experience under his belt, especially in a non-pressure situation. The team's obviously out of contention, so maybe a little different scenario than if he was playing for a team that was in a pennant race. But if not September, I know the A's also don't want to rush him, so they could also wait until next year to bring him up and bring him up for good and hopefully for a permanent stay.
Drake asks, will we see Renato Nunez at some point?
Yeah, I think Renato Nunez, in his case, he's a guy that deserves to be here in September. I know the A's are always big on rewarding guys who have had good seasons down at Nashville in September. There's not necessarily room for him. The A's are pretty much set at the corner infields. And I know Renato has also been playing some outfield, and the A's also have enough of those here too. But I would think that the A's would reward him with the season he's had, because he's put up obviously some really good power numbers.
And our last question comes from Mike. What are the goals this upcoming season, off-season?
I think, a lot of the goals that the A's wanted to accomplish happened in the middle of this season. They obviously got younger very quickly, brought up a lot of guys that had been talked about for so long. So really it's just looking at those pieces, and seeing what's left. I think there's still some spots in the organization that they could bolster, particularly starting pitching. It's really just kind of been emptied out just because so many of those guys that we had talked about are already here, guys like Sean Manaea, Daniel Gossett, and so I think, that's probably an area of focus for them. But I think that, they've done well in recent trades, not just this year, but in recent years. So it's just kind of putting all those pieces together and moving forward and obviously staying patient. Thanks for watching the Beat Reporters Inbox on MLB.com, presented by Edward Jones. Tune in again next time.